everybody, welcome back to Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course, Lesson Book Level 1. Today's video is Lesson 41, covering page 46 in our book, The Popular Spiritual, Standing in the Need of Prayer. So notice at the top of the page where it says, for this popular spiritual, we return to the C position. So the C position was the very first position we learned in this book. So taking your right hand thumb on middle C, and one octave below it, your left hand pinky on that C. And then of course, placing each finger on the next note above it. C, D, E, F, G, C, D, E, F, G. So this should be very familiar to you. I think it's been a little while since we were in this position, but here we are. So as with most of these pieces, I like to just look at the right hand first. Well, sometimes I look at the left hand, but I'm going to look at the right hand first on this one. Now, before we actually start playing some notes, let's also look at some information on the score, the music itself. So we've got 4/4 in our time signature, so 4 beats per measure. And notice that the very first note of the right hand is an incomplete measure. The first part of that measure is at the very bottom of the page. The very last measure on the bottom line has 3 beats. And so this is actually beat 4. So when you begin the piece, it's not beat 1 in the incomplete measure, it's beat 4. And then your next measure, you're on beat 1. Now, the other thing are rhythms. So we've got, our basic quarter notes, half notes, dotted half notes throughout this piece. But remember in lesson 40, we learned a new rhythm. We learned about the 8th note. So if you look over on the third full measure of the first line, we have 4 8th notes there in a row in the right hand. Those are all the same note, middle C. So when you have a piece of music that has 8th notes, you're no longer simply counting 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to think about the halves now because 8th notes get half a beat. And so now every note you have to honor the full beat, meaning, both halves of that beat. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. 1 is the first half of beat 1 and is the second half of beat 1. So those 4 8th notes right there on the third full measure are 1 and 2 and. Each get half a beat. 1 and 2 and. Now the next note is a quarter note. And the following note after that is also a quarter note. But you're not going to go 3, 4. Because if you do that, you end up rushing those quarter notes. And technically, you're only honoring the first half of beat 3 and beat 4. So you have to say 3 and 4 and. So I put that whole measure together. It's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Which means when I get to the last measure, the dotted half note is going to feel really long. 1 and 2 and 3 and. But that is accurate. You don't want to go 1, 2, 3 and rush it. Now that being said, I'm going to go through right now and play just the notes in the right hand. And I'm not going to be too specific about the counting yet. So sometimes you just want to go through first and just hit the notes and focus on fingering. Do be aware of what notes are longer and what notes are shorter. So I will play the 8th notes a little bit faster. But I'm going to go through a second time and then implement the counting. Okay, so let's start at the beginning with the right hand. Notice the first note is the third finger on E. And remember we said that's on beat 4. So you're going to play that E on beat 4. The next measure, the E again for 3 beats. And then on beat 4, the E again. The next measure, the E, once again on beat 1. Beat 2 is D, and then 3 and 4 is the C. Now you stay on the C for the 4 8th notes in the next measure. And then up to D. Remember, these are quarter notes. And then the last measure, back to E with our third finger. Dotted half note is 3 counts. Beat 4, the E again. Second line, the E again. Dotted half note, 3 counts. Beat 4, the E again. Next measure, the E again. And then down to D. And then middle C for 2 counts. The 4 8th notes once again on C. But instead of going to D like the first line, here we skip up a third to E. And then beat 4 is D. And then the last measure, middle C for 3 beats. On the third line, notice that is a pickup. So 2/8 notes, 4 and. So the first note is E. That second note is a D sharp. So here's D. And if I sharp it, it's the next key to the right, white or black. In this case, it's black. So it's right there. So notice the E is here and the D sharp is here. Very, very tight, very close. Now on the next measure, you're going to play that E and D sharp 4 more times. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Now remember the rule though. You might be saying, wait a second. I only see 1 D sharp in that measure. But the rule is this. That D sharp lasts the entire measure now. So if you have a sharp or a flat marked in a measure, that same note is going to remain sharp or flat through the end of the measure. Once you get to the next measure, it's canceled. So this pattern of E and D sharp is a total of 5 times. The first one is on 4 and then 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and next measure E quarter note, D natural because it's next measure, so the D sharp is canceled, and then middle C for 2 counts. Again, we have 4/8 note C's, D quarter note, D again, and then E, 3 counts, dotted half note. Then we do this pattern again, a total of 5 times. Here at the end of the third line, the E and D sharp is on 4 and then next measure, bottom line, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and next measure E, D natural, and middle C for 2 counts. Then we have middle C 4/8 notes, and then skip up to E, third finger, and then D, and then back to middle C for 3 counts. Now there at the bottom of this measure in red, it says DC al fine. That is Italian. DC means da capo. It literally translates to from the head. In this case, the beginning. So when you see a DC in music, you're going to go back to the beginning of the song or the piece, at the very beginning, without any pause. So we're at the end of that measure on middle C, 1 and 2 and 3 and back to the beginning, 4 and 1 and 2, and you continue. It also says al fine. So that means up to the finish. So you're going back to the beginning and then go to the finish. The fine is the finish. So look at the end of the second line where it says fine. That is actually the end of the piece. And that is a true double bar line right there. The bottom of the fourth line, that's not a true double bar line. There are 2 lines there, but notice those 2 lines are thin. A double bar line has a thin line and a thick line, a bold line. So at the fine, that is actually the conclusion of the piece. So you're really going to play this piece a total of 1.5 times. Okay, so that covers the notes and the fingering in the right hand. I noticed something interesting about the notes in this piece. You may have noticed it too. You're in your C position. The highest note you play in this piece is an E. The lowest note you play is a middle C. And the only other notes you're going to play are D's and occasionally the D sharp. You're only playing these 4 notes. That's it. There's no F anywhere. There's no G. You're just right here. I did something wrong, and I want to be aware of that. Your fingering is going to be, of course, the thumb on middle C. Your second finger is going to be used for D or D sharp. So don't get in the habit of like third finger on D sharp, because you don't want to do this when you get there. That is not even going to be smooth at all. You want this. So thumb is always on middle C, second finger is D or D sharp, and the third finger is E. But yeah, you only have those 4 notes, so that's kind of interesting. All right, I want to go back through and play it again, this time with the count. I'm going to try my best to count out loud. Hopefully, I drink enough water so that I don't stutter. So forgive me if I do. At the beginning, we said 4/4 time, right? And we come in on beat 4. So I'm going to give a count off first. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 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 and... Now I'm going to stop right there. The first time through, when you see the fine and you see the double bar, you ignore it. It's like that's not even there. You notice how I played the middle C at the end of the second line for 3 counts, and then I went right into the third line without any pause. So just as a reminder, that's what you're going to do the very first time. So I'm going to pick it up there at the end of the second line. 1 and 2 and 3 and keep going. 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 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 4 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. Back to the beginning. 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and you'll continue just like you played it the first time. Since this is the second time, you'll continue through the end of the second line and then you will finish. So at the very bottom, I did the same thing that I did from the second to third line. I go back to the beginning without any pause. Those 2 lines at the bottom there of the fourth line are only there to say, hey, this is like the end of a section, and it's more of like a visual than a musical thing, because like I said, musically, you're just going 1 and 2 and 3 and continue 4 and there's not a pause. Now, if you had someone singing it, they might take like a breath. But when I say pause, I mean like you're not going to stop counting. You might have a little lift, like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... See, a little lift I took. That's like a singer taking like a little breath. But the counting doesn't stop. The counting just keeps continuing. So that covers the notes, the fingering, and the count of the right hand. Let's look in the bass clef at our left hand. So the good news is the left hand should be very familiar to you. It's just 3 chords that you've learned in the past. The C chord, C, E, and G. 5, 3, and 1. The C chord. You have the G7 chord, B. So remember that pinky is going to go down a little bit to B. You also have F and G. So 5, 2, and 1. So G7 chord. Now the piece is mostly the C chord and the G7 chord. There's one other chord which is only played twice, and that's the F chord. C, F, and A. 5, 2, and 1. So again, you have the C chord. When I go to the G7 chord, these 2 fingers are already in place. Thumb on G, 2 on F. Your pinky's the one that moves to B. So as I go from C, watch my hand as that happens. Only my pinky moves. My 2 and 1 are just both engaged now. Now when you go to the F chord in the song, you're coming from the C chord. So it's kind of the opposite of what I just did. Your thumb, instead of your pinky, is the one that's going to move to the F chord. Moves to A from the G. Your 2 is going to be on F. So it's already there. And the C, your pinky's there as well. So here we go to the F chord. Notice the thumb moves. The other 2 fingers stay put. If you're still having a problem with these fingers coming up, try to hold them down a little bit with your right hand. Because if they come up, and I go back to my C chord, look at that third finger. It's not as close. It's doable, but it takes more time. If I'm here, I've got that third finger pointing nicely right at that E, so when I go to my C chord, I'm there. And that makes all the difference when I want to go fast. Now, fortunately, in this piece, you don't have to go fast. But it's nice to be able to do it that fast, because then it's just going to be that much more on automatic when you put both hands together, because you're going to be thinking about that right hand too, and you want your left hand to just be ready to go. Let's look at the left hand now. I'm going to go really slow, and I'm going to do it all, meaning I'm going to show you the chords, of course, the notes, but I'm also going to count. And I also want you to be aware of the rests. These rests are very important. Rests are always important in music. Rests are just as important as the notes. Sometimes we think, oh, I'm not doing anything during the rest, so it's just not important. No, rests actually can add to the style of music, especially if it's in the left hand. Rests can actually add some energy to what you're playing before or after the rests. Because if I just hold my chord through the rests, then I'm getting lazy, and lazy isn't really energy. So if I'm lifting off that rest, it takes a little more energy, and you're going to convey that in the music. So rests are very important, and the rests in this piece are all in the left hand. Notice at the very beginning, the pickup measure, that's a rest. Look at beat 1 of the next measure. That's a rest. So you don't actually come in until beat 2. And what the left hand is doing right there is this echo effect. Your right hand is doing these notes, and there's your echo. You can even look at the words in parenthesis for the left hand. So the right hand going, it's me, and then you have it's me in the background. So it's like, here's your soloist, here's your background singers. So that's really what you're doing here as the pianist. You're the entire group, the entire band. So you want to convey that. So again, if you're going through those rests, then it's like these lazy singers who don't even know what they're doing. So you also have the rest on beat 4. And then at the end of that line, you have a rest on beat 4 as well. You're pretty much duplicating that same idea on the second line. When you get to the third line, then it's a little more even. You've got rest on the pickup measure. Then you got chord on beat 1, rest on beat 2, chord on 3, rest on 4, and then you have chords. Again, you have a rest at the end of that line, and then you pretty much repeat the idea on the bottom line. So let's go through with the count and the chords for the left hand. So I'm going to give a count off, and then we'll go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and so C chord, G7, C and 4 and next measure 1 and 2 and G7, 3 and 4 and back to C, 1 and 2 and 3 and rest and 2 and 3 and rest and 1 and G7 chord, back to C chord and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and here we go, 1 and F chord, 2 and 3 and keep going, 4 and 1 and rest and 3 and rest and 1 and G7 back to C and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and rest and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and F chord, 2 and 3 and then we repeat 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and then it's played the exact same way until you reach the fine. All right, so by itself the left hand's pretty easy, as it usually tends to be, but make sure before you put your hands together that each hand is precise on its own. If there's ever any doubt, any question on anything in each hand, any struggles, you know that when you put the hands together, it's just going to be that much more difficult. So it's tempting, I know, to just want to put it all together right away, but do focus on the hands separate. Do focus on the counting, especially. A lot of that is because of these eighth notes. Now we're counting differently. We're counting by halves. So this is still kind of new to a lot of you. And the count is the glue. When we put the hands together, it really is the glue. And what you can even do is go through the music and write out all the counting throughout the entire piece. And you always write the counting between the treble and the bass clef. So right in the center there. That way you get the counts lined up between both hands. So at the very beginning, that very quarter note, I would write 4 underneath the quarter note, and then just to the right, an and symbol, maybe a plus sign. That's what I do. On the next measure, right under that right hand, E, write a 1 and then the left hand comes in on 2 and again on 3 and then line up the 4 underneath the right hand quarter note for 4 and. Of course, when you get to the third measure, each eighth note, 1 and 2 and. So if you write out all the counts, you'll have this really strong visual that is the glue, and it's like a vertical system that lines up both hands. So it's kind of nice to see how everything will start lining up as well. All right, so the last thing I'm going to do is talk about the dynamics now and other forms of expression. So the piece says rhythmically not too fast. So it's not a smooth piece. So I'm not saying play it really choppy, but it doesn't have to be really smooth, except for one exception. Down on the third line, look at the right hand. There's a slur underneath all those eighth notes, specifically these. Now, it's my opinion, the reason they put that slur there is because you don't want to do this. If you do that over and over, that's going to annoy someone really quick. It is not pretty. Even this it's not the prettiest thing in the world. But if I lighten up, so it says mezzo forte, I actually would play this mezzo piano. Go a little softer, stay really close to the keys, and try to play it smooth. It'll make it that much more pleasant. So that spot repeats itself on the fourth line as well. Do the same thing. So we're just trying to make this a little less annoying and as musical as we possibly can. But other than that, everything else is just pretty rhythmic. The piece starts at mezzo forte, but look at the third full measure. We have a crescendo, and it gets all the way up to forte. Now in piano, if you hit a single note, whatever touch you give it, that's it. And then it slowly fades away. So a crescendo, remember, is a gradual increase in volume. You can't gradually increase on one note. If you look at your left hand, you have 2 chords. So I can start this one softer and the next one louder. And then finally forte. But the real movement on that crescendo is in the right hand. So the more notes you have, the more you can bring out a crescendo. So like I said, I can do a little bit in the left hand, and I have to. I can't just let it sit there. The left hand is supporting the right hand. It is the band, the accompaniment. The right hand's also the singer, the soloist. But it's that soloist that gets the spotlight and has the attention, and in this case, controls the crescendo. So I can do much more with the right hand. Now the key to a fine crescendo is start a little bit softer at the beginning of it. So if I'm at mezzo forte, here I might back off. Really let it grow. So that really gets the attention of that crescendo. Then you stay at a forte through the second line, and when you get to that third measure on the second line, you're at forte, and then you're going to come back down. And these last chords in the left hand, more movement, make sure they are quite soft. And I get down pretty soft. A lot of people would interpret that as, well, we're just going back to mezzo forte. Yeah, that's true actually, but I always felt like you can do even more. You can, like I said, start a crescendo a little bit softer. You can end a diminuendo a little bit softer. So when you go to the third line, just bump it back up to a mezzo forte. However, in this case, I do recommend staying at the mezzo piano because, again, I don't really like that any louder than it has to be. So I'm going to recommend you stay at mezzo piano on the third line. Notice it crescendos on the third line to forte. Now when you continue going to the fourth line, just back it down. Do the same thing. Now you may be saying, yeah, but we're soft. What happens when I get to the end of the fourth line? How much softer can I get? The diminuendo, you can start a little bit louder. So I'm coming off of this, start a little bit louder, and then get softer. So you'll have much more musical result if you exaggerate some of these dynamics a little bit more. All right, so last thing I'm going to do is play it through all the way from the beginning. I'm not going to count it out loud. I just want you to hear how it sounds musically with the dynamics that I just discussed, and of course, getting a feel for the da capo, going back to the beginning and then finishing it at the very end. So here we go. I will give a little count off just in case you want to play along. 1 and 2 and 3 and. And if you want, at the very end there, you can hold that out like it's a fermata, just so people know that that's the end of the piece. So one more thing, as I was playing it together, I hadn't really talked much about putting the hands together, except that the fingering is the glue, and it's true. But when you're trying to coordinate things, notice the spots where both hands play together, especially where there's more movement. So I'm going to pull out the second full measure on the first line. So when you have more movement between the hands, I recommend going very slow and breaking it down. Call it out as you see it, as you play it. C chord left hand, third finger E right hand, and make sure it sounds as one. And then call out, G7 chord, left hand, second finger D, and then play it. And then lastly, back to the C chord and middle C with the thumb, and then play it. So break it down that much, and the more you talk about it, talk it through, the more your brain is going to pick up on it and really learn it. Don't just try to go through the motions. Measures like the one before, I find it's a little easier because the hands aren't really playing at the same time. However, you do have the rests I talked about in the left hand, so you want to honor those. Especially there. It's so tempting to just go. See what I'm doing? I'm getting lazy and I'm not lifting on beat 4. So that's something else to be aware of, wherever that occurs. And then, of course, the third measure on that first line. Don't even worry about the crescendo until you've got the hands locked in place. And if you have to pause here and say, okay, G7 chord, left hand, second finger D, right hand. It's better to pause and analyze what you're doing before you just guess. Because if you guess, you're just always going to be lucky. You don't want to be lucky. You want to know this. So anywhere in the piece, learn to read vertically. Line things up when you put the hands together. And then the last spot is, of course, the third and fourth line where you have this. Again, don't get lazy with that left hand. Bring it up. So there's a pattern there. Right hand, both hands. Right hand, both hands. Right hand, and then both hands. So, you could even say that. That might help with the coordination. I think that covers everything on this piece. So it is a little challenging. It's going to take a little bit of work. If you practice every single day, it could take a few days for some of you. It could take a week, could take longer. Just depends, how your practicing goes. So it's not so much about how much you practice, but again, how you practice. So breaking down the tough spots, working on the tough spots, not just playing it over and over. That's wasting time. So, all right. I hope everything made sense for you. I hope everything's clear. If ever you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the section below, and I will do my best to respond to you as soon as possible. And I wish you all the best on this, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.